expected on those measures sometime after 5 p.m. The Senate is also debating trade agreements today. Both the House and the Senate are expected to pass them before South Korea's president addresses a joint meeting of Congress tomorrow. Thanks for watching today. We'll be back tomorrow.
John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5th, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from the list submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall the debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And Mr. Speaker, yesterday I had the privilege and the humbling experience of going to Walter Reed at Bethesda. It is a magnificent medical complex, and our young men and women deserve to have that kind of treatment. I was so impressed. In visiting the wounded and thanking them for their service, I encountered a 22-year-old Lance Corporal who was wounded during his second tour of duty in Afghanistan. Standing there in his room with his mother, he asked me, why are we still in Afghanistan? And I looked at his mother and I looked in his face. I said, I don't know. I said, there are a few of us in the House trying to get our troops back home before 2014, 2015. Mr. Speaker, I have beside me a photograph of a triple amputee, a soldier with his wife who's lost both legs and an arm. Yesterday, I noted to the doctor who was escorting me around that I saw more double amputees than ever before. Saw some down in the rehab center, and saw those in the rooms that have not gotten to that point yet because of their severe wounds. He said, Congressman, the number of double amputees is going up every week, every month, and it will continue to go up. My question to the leadership of the House, why don't you speak out, both parties, and call on Mr. Obama to bring our troops home before 2015? It's kind of ironic. Last week, I represent the 3rd District of North Carolina, and we got hit pretty hard, like most of the states, all the way up to Vermont, by the hurricane. And it was so ironic last week that we passed a continuing resolution that had $2.65 billion for FEMA to help those who have been disasters from wildfires in Texas to tornadoes to hurricanes, $2.65 billion. But yet we found $118 billion to spend in Afghanistan and Iraq. Where does that equal itself out? The American people get shortchanged while we send $118 billion to Afghanistan and Iraq. It makes no sense. That's why it's so ironic that the American people have given all of us in Congress an 18% approval rating. And here we will be passing the trade bills today to send jobs overseas. That'll be great. The American people are tired and fed up. And what bothers me more than anything are those young men and women over at Walter Reed who are 20, 22, 25, and I met a gunny sergeant who was in his early 30s, both legs gone, trying to learn to walk. I hope that the leadership in the House and Senate will join Jim McGovern and many of us in both parties who are speaking out about getting our troops home before 2014, 2015. And, Mr. Speaker, I hope the American people, I want to say to those people that are protesting Wall Street, whether I agree with you or not, you have a right to protest. Join us in protesting the war in Afghanistan. We are beginning the 11th year. And as the 22-year-old Lance Corporal said to me, why are we still there? I couldn't answer him. I don't know. I don't know. Karzai gets $10 billion a month, and the people that have lost so much in the hurricanes and tornadoes, they get a measly penance to what Karzai gets. Please, American people, join us and put pressure on the House and Senate. Let's bring our troops home. Mr. Speaker, my close is this. I ask God to please bless our men and women in uniform. I ask God to please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. I ask God in His loving arms to hold the families who've given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. I ask God to bless the House and Senate that we will do what is right in the eyes of God for His people today and His people tomorrow. And I ask God to give wisdom, strength, and courage to President Obama that he will do what is right in the eyes of God for God's people today and God's people tomorrow. And 3 times I will ask from the bottom of my heart, God please, God please, God please continue to bless America. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair reminds members to direct its responses to the Chair. Chair recognizes at this time the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I certainly agree with my colleague from North Carolina that it is time for us to not just reassess but readjust our policies in Afghanistan, scale it down, bring the troops home. There's another area of consensus that I hope that we can focus on. Most people agree that employment, jobs, ought to be a priority for this Congress, for the government, for American business. But much of what you hear on Capitol Hill about creating jobs and employment is very, very contentious. Yet what is complex and controversial in Congress is not so hard when you move off the Hill, when you look at what the experts suggest, when you look at what the American people will support. For the shape of a future recovery is emerging in terms of a consensus about what we should do. I think we probably will. The question is when. First and foremost, it is important that we rebalance our long-term programs and priorities. But in the short term, it is not only important to keep the spending levels at where they are, it would be disastrous to cut it further. Chairman Bernanke said just last week that short-term increases can strengthen economic demand with a long-term adjustment to strengthen our balance sheet by reducing the deficit. One of the first places to start is rebuilding and renewing America. Experts agree we have vast unmet needs. The Society of Civil Engineers suggests $2.3 trillion that should be spent in the next 5 years on repairing our roads and our bridges, extending and enhancing our transit system. There are 24 cities across America that are looking at reintroducing a modern streetcar, which can be done quickly and will spark investment in those communities that have that opportunity. We have aging and inadequate water systems that leak 6 billion gallons of water a day, enough to fill 9,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools that would stretch from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh. We have an aging and ineffective electrical grid. We have pipelines that needed to be upgraded for safety. There is environmental cleanup, especially expensive Superfund sites that otherwise will continue to put a cloud over the adjacent businesses and governments. This will create millions of family wage jobs in the course of the next year. It is important to deal with our health care system, which is creating jobs, but unfortunately it's creating jobs now very inefficiently. We pay more than anybody else in the world by far, and compared to what other developed countries produce, we have mediocre results as a whole. Spectacular for some Americans, but overall, Americans die sooner, get sick more often, stay sick longer. By accelerating the health care reforms to provide value instead of volume of health care, we can squeeze more value and the right type of employment that will be sustainable over time and help make Americans healthier. There is, Mr. Speaker, no question that we need, in fact, to pay for this over the long term. But the path here is something that most of the American public will, in fact, agree on, and the experts have a consensus that this isn't, in fact, where we start with tax equity, making sure everybody is paying their fair share, adjust user fees for infrastructure for inflation, not anything immediate, but over the course of the next year or two, to be able to have the cash flow to meet our obligations. For transportation, for water, reinstituting the Superfund tax that expired in 1995, leaving communities with the toxic legacy. It's important to consider a financial transaction fee, something that other European countries have, that England has had since for over a century, that would in fact give stability to our markets. This is something that's within our capacity, Mr. Speaker. I hope we do it sooner rather than later.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Alabama, Mrs. Roby, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask to extend and revise my remarks. I come to the floor today to talk about the need to pass the 3 free trade agreements that we will be voting on today. These agreements will mean more export opportunities, access to raw materials at a lower cost for American manufacturing, and make American companies and farmers more competitive in additional markets where they currently face high tariffs. Free trade agreements result in jobs and profits for American businesses. In 2010, the 2nd District of Alabama saw 4,927 jobs directly supported by exports. Of the $2 billion in total merchandise exports, $769.4 million was to free trade agreement partners. The Korea, Colombia, and Panama free trade agreements will open up opportunities for businesses all over the nation, including those in my home state of Alabama. In regards to the Korea free trade and what it means to Alabama, in 2009, Alabama did $300 million in exports to Korea, making Korea the 11th largest export market for Alabama. According to the Business Roundtable, the agreement that we will be voting on today, it will make more than half of Alabama's merchandise exports to Korea to be duty-free. The immediate tariff eliminations in this bill gives Alabama exports a $3.1 million cost advantage over similar products exported by competitors who do not have free trade agreement with Korea. Additionally, agriculture in Alabama will benefit from the Korea Free Trade Agreement. Currently, U.S. agricultural products face tariffs up to 500% in South Korea. By eliminating these tariffs, agriculture will see over $20.3 million in additional gains in sales to South Korea. In particular, it is estimated that Alabama's export of poultry will rise to $4.4 million per year and cattle and beef to $3.7 million per year. In regards to the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, in 2010, Colombia was Alabama's 21st largest export market with $154 million in exports. The agreement we will be voting on today will mean an estimated 72.3% increase in exports for Alabama to Colombia and 56.4% in fabricated metal products. And finally, Panama is one of the fastest expanding economies in Latin America. In 2010, the United States saw a 7.5% growth in exports to Panama. In regards to agriculture, the United States exported more than $450 million to Panama in 2010. The 3 agreements that we are voting on today in total are expected to increase direct agriculture exports from Alabama by $22.8 million per year, and the increased marketing opportunities will add more than 200 jobs to the Alabama economy. It is unfortunate that these agreements have taken so long to be considered by Congress, and they will have a significant impact on our economy. This delay has already put American businesses at a disadvantage with the South Korea-European Union Free Trade Agreement going into effect in July of this year. American businesses do not need a stimulus or stimulus programs that do not work. I have come to the floor several times to talk about how American businesses are being stifled by overreaching and burdensome regulations. American businesses have also been stifled by the slow-moving administration in ensuring that our businesses have the same advantages as those in other countries. These agreements remove the high tariffs that have been in place in important and expanding markets. I will continue to work to protect and promote jobs here in the United States and in my home state of Alabama, and will be voting yes on all 3 trade agreements, and I ask my colleagues to do so as well. Thank you, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Kissel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today and to speak of the opposition that I will have to the free trade agreements that we'll be voting on today, and to speak some of the details about those free trade agreements that seem to not be discussed, that we seem to want to talk about that these free trade agreements will be good without understanding the details of what we will be voting upon. My opposition to these trade agreements is not based upon any type of partisanship, that negative force called partisanship that is too much a part of our lives here in Washington I don't deal with. This is not partisanship. This is not some type of blinded protectionism that somehow we need to close our shores. I'm very well aware of the global impact of our modern economy, and it's not based upon any type of ignorance of the potential good that these so-called free trade agreements can present to us. Indeed, I have lived in a part of the country that has suffered immensely from free trade agreements. I worked 27 years in textiles and watched the jobs leave. My district, North Carolina's 8th district, is still suffering, as it has for the last 10 years, because of the results of free trade agreements. Indeed, if you look at the facts of our nation, where we are in our economy, it's hard to say that since free trade agreements have become part of our life that has been good for the nation. We look at our working families, and it was reported last week that our working families are now at income levels of the mid-1990s. We've lost so much of our industrial base. We've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. And we continue to see our trade deficits climb and climb and climb. Mr. Speaker, we have the world's greatest economy. We need trade agreements, but not these trade agreements. We need for people to come to us and say, we'd like to play in the United States market, and then we should say what terms that we should have for that. So what are the details of the Korean Free Trade Agreement? We hear that it will create 75,000 jobs. The Economic Policy Institute tells us we will lose over 150,000 jobs. And we'll hear a lot about the jobs that were created. But we won't hear too much about those jobs that were lost, of which 40,000 jobs are estimated to be lost in the textile industry. We won't hear about how 65% of something can be made in another country and brought to South Korea and finished there and then brought into the United States, when recognizing that China is the next-door neighbor to Korea. So how much transshipment is going to come out of China? The 65% to South Korea. We won't hear that North Korea will be allowed to send goods to the United States as a part of this trade agreement. We won't talk about the currency manipulation that South Korea engages in just like China does. We won't talk about the tariffs that will stay in place protecting Korean goods while we drop ours immediately. We'll talk about that we can sell more cars in Korea, up to 75,000 if they choose to buy them. There's no guarantees. When we know that South Korea now is selling in the hundreds of thousands of cars in the United States. Mr. Speaker, we need trade agreements, but we need trade agreements that work for us. This is not a reflection on the countries. It's a reflection on these old NAFTA, CAFTA type trade deals that were negotiated years ago in the Bush era, that have been dusted off and brought to us and being told to us, this is good for the American worker. This will create jobs. Unfortunately, the history of our trade agreements has been anything but that. I was with an administration official in North Carolina a year ago, and I was told how good free trade had been for North Carolina. And I said, I can't address that, but I can address that free trade has not been good for my district. I was told that they could show me the numbers, and I told them I could show them the empty buildings, many of which are not even standing now. They've just been torn down, not replaced with jobs. We retrain our people for what? To ship more jobs offshore? Mr. Speaker, I asked my colleagues to look at the details of this, look at our economy, and look at the jobs we have lost and say, is this good for America? No, it's not. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Gibson from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the fair trade agreements that we will vote on later today. I commend the Obama administration for their work ensuring that our businesses and workers get the best agreement possible to grow the economy and create jobs. While these agreements have been in the works for years, our country has benefited from the improvements garnered by the U.S. Trade Representative Ron Kirk and his team. This is particularly evident in their refining of the South Korean agreement so that our farmers and automobile manufacturers get a fair deal. Of course, each trade agreement is different, and they all have to be evaluated on their merits. Details matter. Overall, these agreements will help increase U.S. exports by an estimated $13 billion, adding $10 billion to our annual gross domestic product and creating nearly 250,000 jobs, including many in my district in upstate New York, and we'll do that without adding a single dollar to the deficit. In fact, these fiscally responsible agreements will help cut the deficit. Our farmers in particular stand to gain significantly from these agreements, opening up nearly $30 million in new business a year for our farmers in New York. These agreements are enthusiastically supported by our New York State Farm Bureau and by my agricultural advisory panel, comprised of farmers from across the 10 counties and 137 towns I represent, a congressional district with over 1,000 family farms. Mr. Speaker, we have the smartest, hardest working farmers in the world. Their issue is profitability. We help farmers when we attack the impediments to growth, taxes, regulation, health care costs, and energy costs. We help farmers when we have access to quality infrastructure, not only roads and bridges, but also access to high-speed broadband. And we help farmers when we expand markets to help them sell their goods. These agreements enhance our farmers' profitability. Supporting our farmers is supporting the American way. Our family farmers represent the best of our country. And this is also a national security issue. No farms, no food. We must ensure our family farms can compete, or we risk losing them and relying on imports with the attendant food security risks. That's not what my constituents want. That's not what our country wants. That's why we need to pass these agreements. Now, in addition to helping our farmers, the independent, nonpartisan U.S. International Trade Commission estimates the key U.S. manufacturing sectors are also poised to gain. This includes increase of U.S. exports of motor vehicles and parts by about 50%, metal products by over 50%, chemical, rubber, and plastic products by about 40%, machinery and equipment by over 30%. This will directly help companies in my district who are already relying on exports with expanding markets for selling their products. Companies like B&B Forest Products in Greene County, Momentive in Saratoga County, EFCO Products in Dutchess County, and Hudson River Stove Works in my home county, Columbia. Now, what's often missed in these conversations about trade are some of the key points. Right now, over 90% of the products coming from Colombia and Panama are already duty-free, when less than 40% of our goods currently go duty-free to these countries. Our goods to South Korea suffer under tariffs about 4 times higher. With passage of these fair trade agreements, we will address these imbalances. These agreements will add to our GDP, strengthen existing jobs, and create new ones. Let's recognize what's at stake, and let's not fool ourselves. If we fail to pass these fair trade agreements and do nothing, we will fall behind. In South Korea, we have seen our beef industry lose more and more of that country's share of business year after year since the 1990s. South Korea is poised to increase agricultural trade with Australia and the European Union. If we don't pass these agreements, we will continue to fall behind while other countries gain. Same with Colombia. In 2007, our farmers accounted for 44% of the agricultural business in Colombia. By 2010, that number fell to 21%. These agreements are about the future. As Americans, we've enjoyed an unprecedented quality of life because we make things other people can't. And we make common goods better than anyone else. That's still the case. In my district, we make the world's most advanced wafers in the semiconductor industry and some of the most advanced medical devices. We are poised to continue our tradition of excellence in this country if we make the right choices. And today, making the right choices means working in a bipartisan way, working with the Obama administration and enacting a key provision of the President's job plan. It means passing these fair trade agreements before the House this week. I urge my colleagues to support these bills and help get America back to work. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Berkeley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to give special recognition to the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce as it celebrates its 100th anniversary on October 21st and marks a century of success in working to help build and sustain Southern Nevada's business community. I'm a proud member of the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce, and as someone who grew up in Southern Nevada and who represents her hometown of Las Vegas here in Congress, it has been remarkable to see firsthand so many outstanding achievements of the Chamber and its thousands of members and how we have shaped our community throughout the years. From designing some of the very first tourism campaigns for Las Vegas to helping pass major small business legislation in recent years, the Chamber has always played a key part in facilitating the growth of Las Vegas and in supporting the business community in Southern Nevada, today's economic engine of the great Silver State. I have had the pleasure to know and work with many of the Chamber's leaders and participants from its members' businesses who serve the families of my community every day and who serve the nearly 40 million visitors drawn to Las Vegas each year. The Las Vegas Chamber's centennial marks a milestone for an organization that had its humble beginnings a century ago in a dusty railroad town, now known around the globe as the entertainment capital of the world. Many of the Chamber's early leaders were instrumental in getting legislation passed to create the first highways being built to and from Las Vegas, making the city more accessible to Northern Nevada, Southern California, Arizona, and Utah. Chamber leaders advocated for the building of Hoover Dam. This modern marvel still operates today, creating electricity for millions of homes and businesses, drawing millions of tourists for recreational opportunities at Lake Mead, and creating thousands of jobs for the region. Chamber leaders were early supporters of the aviation industry in Las Vegas, creating the first airfield to Las Vegas in the 1920s, establishing McCarran Airport's current location. Later, the Chamber worked to secure financing for a modern airport built in 1960. These early leaders recognized the need for air travel to keep Las Vegas accessible, competitive, and relevant, and their support led to McCarran Airport growing to become one of the busiest airports in our nation. The Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce was instrumental in creating the modern method of promoting Las Vegas through the initiation of the Live Wire Fund. Created in 1944, the Live Wire Fund eventually led to creative marketing campaigns and the initiation of the Las Vegas News Bureau to promote Las Vegas tourism and hospitality to the nation and to the world. What happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. The Chamber has always been and remains the voice of business in Southern Nevada. With over 80% of the jobs in the United States created by small businesses, it is my commitment to continue to honor the business people of Nevada by working towards a fairer business environment where Made in America, and especially made and sold in Nevada, drive the philosophy of our business mindset. This will create jobs, put people back to work, and continue to provide the kind of opportunities on which our nation was founded. The Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce has embodied these business ideals for a century, and I look forward to being a part of the great things they do in their 101st year and beyond. In recognition of the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce's success, and they are here today in number on Capitol Hill, in helping to make Las Vegas a brand recognized around the world, and for their unwavering commitment to local businesses, I ask my colleagues to join me in saluting the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce for their 100 years of service, and in wishing this organization and its members another century of extraordinary success. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Chair at this time recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you.
For 5 minutes.
To revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
The President's jobs bill has a surprising number in it for rebuilding our infrastructure. Most Americans would be surprised that that number is only $27 billion. Divide that between states and you barely have enough to put some tar and chips on the roads. And yet as the President is out touting this jobs bill and talking about our crumbling infrastructure, it just isn't going to do the job. How about this number? $129 billion to build roads and buildings and water projects. Unfortunately, that number is not being spent in the United States. Rather, that $129 billion is the number what Americans pay in foreign aid to OPEC countries to build their roads, their palaces, their buildings. Now, unfortunately, that money goes to more than just their infrastructure. It also goes to countries like Iran, who fund their nuclear weapons programs threatening Israel and their neighboring countries. It goes to Iran to fund their assassination attempts against Saudi ambassador. Iran uses it to fund terrorist weapons and IEDs to kill our soldiers. We pay for both sides in the war on terror, and much of that comes through buying foreign energy. In the meantime, our roads are crumbling, our bridges are rusting and corroding, our locks and dams are decaying, our water and sewer pipelines are collapsing. And listen to the cost. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, the numbers are staggering. $935 billion are needed to fix our roads and bridges, $87 billion for aviation, $12.5 billion for our locks and dams, $255 billion to fix our drinking water, $75 billion for energy infrastructure, $50 billion for inland waterways, $50 billion for levees, $265 billion for transit. Where is the money going to come from? What is being proposed are long-term and permanent taxes, about 30 years' worth of more debt and borrowed money from China for a small $27 billion to do this. It's not going to do the job, and raising taxes and creating warfare between classes is not going to do it. Here's what can do it. We have off of our coast about 85 to 115 billion barrels of oil, trillion cubic feet of natural gas, trillions. We have massive amounts of money off our coast. Unfortunately, the administration and others says no, we can't use our money. We have to continue to borrow from China, increase debt, or raise taxes. Those approaches to rebuilding America will not do. What we need to do is free up American resources, use our resources, use our funding to rebuild America. And think what comes out of this. From the royalties, the leases, and from the income taxes that come from hiring, yes, millions of people to involve with civil engineers and operating engineers, laborers, architects, steam fitters, welders, people who work on the rigs. You create $2 to $3 trillion worth of revenue over the next 20 years. What we need to be doing is making a commitment to invest that money in American infrastructure, American resources, American funds for American infrastructure. Think of what this also does for our manufacturing. When you create that kind of demand for steel and concrete and that kind of demand for equipment to be purchased over a long time, this is a real jobs plan. We don't need to be going back hand in hand to other countries and say, please let us borrow more from you. We don't need to be having class warfare. We don't need to be saying, let's just attack people who make a certain amount of money. We don't need to be saying, let's take all the revenue that comes from taxing these corporate jets for 10 years and use it to fund the government for a lousy hour and 45 minutes. Those may be great talking points, but they are not a jobs plan. America wants to work, and America wants us to use our resources. America wants to stop funding both sides of the war on terror. We can do this. And it doesn't take some sort of super plan to do this. It just says America has all the resources. I call upon my colleagues to continue to push for ways that we can free up American resources, stop saying no to American jobs, stop simply using political rhetoric to block these things, but really create this mechanism by which we can pay for rebuilding America. We can do it. We have the resources to do it. We have to have the way, and we have to have the will. With that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes this time a gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Altmaier, for 5 minutes.
Recently, I had the honor of being reappointed to the House Committee on Education and Workforce, a committee on which I served during my first 2 terms in Congress. Consequently, caucus rules require me to in turn step down from the Small Business Committee, where I've proudly served for the past 5 years. As I leave the Small Business Committee, I wanted to take a moment to discuss a few of the important initiatives on which the committee has played a meaningful role during that time. Some of the most important initiatives have been to support the brave men and women who have served our nation in uniform. The Small Business Committee over the past 5 years has led the way in helping small business owners deal with the loss of key employees during long-term overseas deployments and has helped incentivize the hiring of our military veterans. Committee successes include the enactment of my legislation to increase business opportunities for veterans and reservists and support business owners who employ them. This bill was signed into law by President Bush in 2008 and has since helped countless veterans and employers. We also successfully enacted laws to help returning veterans access job training programs and learn entrepreneurial skills to help them transition back into the workforce. As chairman of the Subcommittee on Investigations and Oversight, I was able to convene hearings that gave voice to all sides on pending issues in Congress, including bringing more than a dozen people from western Pennsylvania before the committee to make sure that their voice was heard and their point of view understood during the critical early stages of the legislative process. Our subcommittee held hearings that brought to light the unintended consequences of the Consumer Product Safety Commission's lead regulations on small businesses and home-based toy manufacturers. We also held hearings that raised concerns about the effect that various health care reform proposals might have on small employers and the devastating impact that skyrocketing gas prices can have on businesses and consumers. When CMS proposed a flawed Medicare competitive bidding program that would harm medical equipment suppliers and negatively impact patient access and quality of care, our subcommittee heard the concerns of small businesses across the country. And when necessary, our subcommittee also convened field hearings to discuss important issues, such as a hearing we held in western Pennsylvania to discuss ideas on how to increase access to capital for small businesses. When flooding impacted businesses in western Pennsylvania, we brought the SBA to Aliquippa to personally inspect the damage and improve the SBA's response. And as gas prices continued to climb and the nation looked for solutions to our energy crisis, I joined our former colleague Mary Fallon, now Oklahoma's governor, to co-chair a field hearing in Tulsa to hear directly from the oil industries their explanation of why gas prices were so unacceptably high and what we can do to help bring them down. Our subcommittee also led the way in twice passing through the House my bill to expand access to private capital investment through the SBIR program. And we held the first hearings in either Chamber of Commerce on the controversial credit card interchange fee, an issue that since has grown into a top priority for businesses, consumers, and banks. We worked in a bipartisan way to successfully advocate for repeal of the onerous 1099 reporting requirements included in the health care reform law. All in all, quite a record of bipartisan success. As I leave the committee, I want to thank Ranking Member Velasquez for her help and support during my time on the committee, and I look forward to continuing to work on small business issues through my new committee assignments in the months ahead.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Request permission to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize Matt Porter of State College, Pennsylvania, the 2011 recipient of the National Down Syndrome Society's Dan Piper Award. Dan Piper was a young man born with Down syndrome who spent much of his life advocating on behalf of himself and others with Down syndrome. He sadly passed away on September 1st, 2002. In order to celebrate Dan's life, the Dan Piper Award was created to recognize and celebrate an individual with Down syndrome that has made similar contributions to Down syndrome awareness and advocacy. Today, I'm pleased and proud to recognize one of my constituents, Matt Porter, as the 2011 recipient of this great honor. I've met Matt Porter on several occasions. Most recently, I joined him and others at the Center County Down Syndrome Society's annual Buddy Walk. My introduction to Matt, however, was sometime before that, when he visited my Washington office in mid-February with his brother Andy. Matt was visiting congressional offices to raise awareness for the Down Syndrome Society and to advocate on issues most pressing to those who are living with Down syndrome. Matt's personality and attitude towards life embody the spirit of the Dan Piper Award. Much like Dan, Matt's accomplishments have opened so many doors to those with Down syndrome. I find Matt to be an inspiring individual, and I commend him on the hard work with his employment, participating in the Special Olympics, volunteering in the community, and advocating on behalf of others with Down syndrome. We all stand a lot to learn from this young man's example and character. Congratulations, Matt Porter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today because I feel like I have a case of deja vu. 2 years ago, I stood on this floor on the 8th anniversary of our invasion of Afghanistan and asked, have our 8 years, 791 American deaths, and billions of U.S. dollars spent in Afghanistan made America safer? Today, I stand in the same place asking the same question. Now, 10 years have passed. 1,800 American lives have been lost, and we have spent almost $500 billion. And I have to ask again, have 10 years in Afghanistan made America safer? Sadly, just as I concluded 2 years ago, I must conclude again today. They have not. We went into Afghanistan under the mantle of protecting America's national security. The perpetrators of September 11th, al-Qaeda, were in Afghanistan, and we had to go after them. But just as was the case 2 years ago, al-Qaeda is no longer primarily in Afghanistan. In fact, only 50 to 100 al-Qaeda operatives are estimated to be operating in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda's primary hub is still located across the border in tribal areas of Pakistan, and other al-Qaeda cells are operating around the world in Yemen, North Africa, and through affiliated groups in Southeast Asia and Uzbekistan. Threats to America are not from Afghanistan, but from ungoverned spaces around the world, and even right here on American soil. A review of recently foiled terrorist plots shows up the widespread origins of U.S.-centered terror attempts. The Times Square bomber is a Pakistani-American who received training in the Waziristan region of Pakistan. The explosives hidden in ink cartridges are destined for an American synagogue in my own district in Chicago were planted by a Saudi militant and shipped from Yemen. The Christmas Day airline bomber was a Nigerian inspired by Anwar al-Awlaki, who was based in Yemen. And another devotee of al-Awlaki was the Fort Hood shooter, Nadal Hassan, an American citizen born in Virginia. Not one of these terror plots originated in Afghanistan, and yet still we maintain close to 100,000 U.S. troops on ground there. Every major recent victory the U.S. has had in the fight against terrorism has come not on the ground in Afghanistan, but through targeted attacks, such as those that killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan and the recent strike that killed Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen. There have been at least 45 jihadist terrorist attacks plotted against the U.S. since 9/11, and each one of them was foiled, not by our massed ground forces in Afghanistan, but through a combination of intelligence, policing, and citizen engagement. According to terrorism expert Eric Dahl of the Naval Postgraduate School, quote, when it comes to domestic attacks and securing the homeland, what works is really good old-fashioned policing, law enforcement, tips from the public, police informants. Not only is our military action in Afghanistan not making us safer, but research indicates it could actually be making us less safe. As counterinsurgency expert David Kilcullen points out, rather than reducing the number of terrorists, the U.S. presence in Afghanistan could actually be spurring new terrorism as locals band together to resist foreign occupation. It's called accidental guerrilla syndrome. Further, a report issued last year by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Representative Tierney, revealed the U.S. military is funding the multi-billion-dollar protection racket. A good portion of the $2.16 billion transportation contract is being paid to corrupt public officials, warlords, and the Taliban to get needed supplies to our troops. We are funding the very insurgency we are fighting. We went into Afghanistan to make America safer. But for several years now, we have known that our enemies are no longer concentrated in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda is an enemy without borders, and so now we must have a strategy without borders. The question now is, will we adjust our strategy to reflect today's circumstances? Or will we continue to live in the past, repeating this destructive cycle of sending dollars and troops to a mission no longer central to American security? We have to end our military presence in Afghanistan now, because I don't want to stand in this same spot a year from now with another case of deja vu. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Landry, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, with the free trade agreements being debated this week, some of my Democratic colleagues have been talking about our trade deficit. However, if they really want to reduce the trade deficit, they will help me end the President's de facto moratorium on offshore drilling. You see, if oil was a country, it would be our biggest trading partner. Oil makes up 65% of our trade deficit, and it's simple. Drilling equals jobs. It equals American jobs. You see, what I have here is a parking lot to one of the heliports down in my district. In 2004, the parking lot was full. Last year, the parking lot is empty. And you don't have to worry, because that parking lot, when we're drilling offshore, is this full 365 days a year. Here is a port in my district which supplies over 30% of the oil and gas that fuels this nation. You can see the boats in 2004 in the busy port, and today it's empty. If we really want a jobs bill, this is it. In the past year, deepwater permits issuance is 39% below the monthly averages observed over the past 3 years, and shallow water permits, permits that were supposedly never impacted by the moratorium, are off 80% over historical averages. As a result of this de facto moratorium, 11 offshore rigs scheduled to drill in the Gulf have relocated to countries like Brazil, Nigeria, Egypt, Congo, French Guiana, and Liberia. Now, what does this say about American policy when businesses prefer the regulatory certainty offered by Egypt over the bureaucratic uncertainty of our own shores? And while 11 rigs might not seem like a lot, each drilling platform supports 200 to 300 workers every month. Additionally, each exploration and production job supports 4 other positions. Therefore, 900 to 1,400 jobs per idle rig are at risk if production does not resume as soon as possible. And wages for those jobs average $1,800 per week. So the potential for lost wages is more than $5 to $10 million per month per platform. Drilling equals good paying jobs. According to the Obama administration's own estimate, the 6-month official moratorium on drilling costs up to 12,000 jobs. However, the long-term impacts of the de facto moratorium could be significantly higher. A study from the Louisiana University predicts that if the de facto ban on deepwater drilling were sustained for 18 more months, that we could lose 36,000 jobs nationwide, 24,000 of those along the Gulf Coast region alone. If the administration would accelerate the permit issuance instead of continuing this de facto moratorium, we could create 250,000 jobs in this country. We could increase GDP by $8 trillion over the next 10 years. And as I said, the solution is actually very simple. At no cost to the taxpayer, at the ability to bring revenue into the federal government, it's simple, Mr. Speaker. Drilling equals jobs. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair at this time recognizes the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Capter.
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 5 minutes and
Without
to include
objection.
extraneous material in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to talk on 2 subjects. 1, liberty and justice, and number 2, our economy. On the first, as co-chair of the House Ukrainian Caucus, I stand today and join my voice to the citizens of the free world who stand in solidarity with freedom lovers in Ukraine, seeking liberty and justice for all. It is with the deepest concern that we raise strenuous objection to the political decision by Ukraine's Pereshevsk court that sentenced former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko to prison this October 11th. The court's guilty verdict sentences her to 7 years in prison, bars her from holding office for 3 years, and effectively stops her from participating in Ukraine's upcoming elections. Ukraine's actions also should call into question Ukraine's accession to the European Union. I join with the members of the Ukrainian Congress of America in supporting immediate congressional hearings on what has transpired in Ukraine. I urge our leadership to allow the passage of a resolution expressing U.S. objection to the actions of Ukraine's politically driven judicial system that seem to have more to do with politics than justice. In furtherance of these objectives, I place on record on behalf of the Ukrainian Caucus the official statement of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, which represents over 1 million Americans of Ukrainian descent, equally incensed at what has occurred. From their statement, the Ukrainian Congress states they call upon the government of the United States to take appropriate measures to support democracy and human rights in Ukraine. They urge the United States government to restrict visas and freeze assets of the current anti-democratic regime and to hold congressional hearings on sanctions and future foreign assistance to the government of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to join me, to join our caucus, to speak out and act then on behalf of the advance of democracy and justice in post-Soviet Ukraine. I also wish to address today the U.S. economy. We've heard a lot about the trade agreements that are going to come before us today, dealing with so-called free trade for South Korea, for Colombia, and for Panama. I just want to put some information on the record. I've served in Congress a while now and fought against the NAFTA trade model back in the 90s when they said it would create jobs, it would result in trade surpluses, and we would have all this extraordinary growth in the United States. And then after NAFTA was passed, what we saw the beginning of hemorrhaging trade deficits with Mexico, with Canada, and indeed with the world. In 1997 and 98, when the China Permanent Normal Trade Relations, which are anything but normal, kicked in, America went even into greater trade deficit, with each $1 billion of trade deficit representing thousands and thousands of lost jobs. And so as we look at the period that we're living through over the last 25 years, as the so-called free trade agreements kick in, with every single one we go deeper and deeper into trade deficit, which kills our growth, economic growth in our country. And now today we're being delivered 3 more. 3 more, South Korea, Panama, and Colombia. When we look back at CAFTA, which was passed in the early 2000s, what happened? Did we get trade balances with those countries? No, there were certain industries that made out like bandits. Okay, I'm glad that some industries can export, and generally agriculture is able to sell a little bit more, but the net is negative. The net is negative. We've lost over 7 million jobs in this country because these agreements are not fair trade agreements. They really don't result in balances for our country. Let's just take a look at what happened with Mexico alone. They told us, the same people who are arguing for these agreements today, back when NAFTA was passed, we had a trade surplus with Mexico. They said, don't worry about it. It's even going to be better. And we said, no, no, it's not going to be better because there's not a real rule of law. There's no respect for the peasant class in Mexico, and the agricultural adjustment is going to be horrendous. It is at the basis of the exodus of Mexican farmers and peasants into our country. That is what is fueling illegal immigration. It is the lack of a resolution to what occurred during NAFTA when agricultural adjustment was not allowed to occur in a humane way in Mexico. And what a pity to go to the communities and to see how people are living there, disrupted from their land, and then in our country to see the jobs outsourced from the United States down there, or the United States to almost anywhere, China, etc., to the low-wage havens with no rule of law. Every year, the trade deficit with Mexico has grown greater and greater. And when we began with NAFTA, we had a trade surplus with Mexico. And now, just take a look at Korea. They say it's going to make trade better. We already have a trade deficit with Korea. And this agreement isn't going to solve it because Korea sells over 500,000 cars in this country, and we only get a few there now. This agreement will not change these numbers. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time, and I ask the members to vote no on the agreements dealing with Korea, Colombia, and Panama.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk today about two people opposed to the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. Alejandro Jose Peñata, a teacher, a union organizer, a spokesperson for fairness for his fellow educators in a country where getting a decent education can be difficult to impossible. And also, I want to talk about Ana Fabricia Córdoba, an advocate for the displaced, an advocate for returning stolen land to those from whom it was taken. Ana and Alejandro were part of a vocal and committed and brave group of Colombians willing to stand up for what they believed in. They stood up for the dispossessed and for presence, for trade union members and for those who wanted to join trade unions. Like many Colombians, they were tremendously concerned about a free trade agreement that reflected the interests of large corporations, but not those of workers and farmers and poor people that fought every day. Ana and Alejandro, if they could, would be with us today to voice their opposition in person to the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. But they can't voice that opposition because they were both murdered in Colombia. Ana was shot dead on a public bus. Alejandro was tortured and hung with barbed wire. These are tragic facts, uncomfortable facts, unacceptable facts, but they are not isolated facts. Sadly, the faces of Ana and Alejandro are the faces of Colombia today. Nowhere in the world is it more dangerous to be a union organizer fighting for wages and rights for working people than in Colombia. 23 trade unionists were killed this year. 51 were killed last year, and over the last several years, hundreds more have been threatened, driven out by violence, or simply disappeared. In 2010, more trade unionists were murdered in Colombia than in the rest of the world combined. In Colombia, there is an organized, intense campaign to prevent working men and women from working together to fight for better wages and working conditions, and it seems to be working. So why would the United States want to endorse this behavior and reward companies working with the government who have unleashed this violent assault on workers' rights? That, after all, is what a trade agreement is really about, a partnership. This is not a partnership the United States of America should enter into. I'm voting no on the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. I believe the facts are simple. Voting for the Colombia Free Trade Agreement is a vote for violent union busting, for driving people from their land, for setting the American working man and women up to compete on an unlevel playing field that will cost us jobs and livelihoods. I know that it is difficult to look at the pictures and hard to accept the reality of danger to people who speak up in Colombia, but we cannot ignore the facts. And in Colombia, trade union activists are targeted for assassination and murder. That's not easy fact to accept, but it's a fact. Approving the free trade pact with Colombia says that the United States can live with this fact. It brings the blood of union activist victims from Bogota to Washington. That blood won't be easily washed away. Let's think about the movements for freedom happening in Cairo and Damascus and Tripoli. We applaud them. We congratulate the protesters. The union leaders in Wisconsin and Ohio and Puerto Rico who stand up for their rights against oppressive state governments. My Democratic colleagues, they applaud those workers. When angry Tea Partiers bash our government and talk about individual rights, my Republican colleagues applaud them. Well, today we have a chance to do more than applaud. We can stand with people who are standing up for freedom in Colombia. I suggest that everyone in the House who has ever celebrated, applauded, or supported a popular pro-democracy movement in the U.S. or abroad think long and hard before they vote yes on the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. Because what we see is what we get when it comes to free trade in Colombia. We get a partnership with a country where speaking your mind is a death sentence. I want free trade, but I'm for an agreement that builds commerce while protecting workers and environment and the rights of farmers and men. There is not that agreement. This is an agreement that turns a blind eye to violence and oppression and injustice. So I ask my colleagues to do what Alejandro and Ana, who were murdered, cannot do. Say no to FTA with Colombia.
This time the